Hello and welcome to this tutorial for GameMaker on how to create multiplayer. In this tutorial I'll be creating a server for GameMaker, and this isn't going to be your regular server. This will be a server in C++. I'm going to be doing an example of how to create the server in GameMaker in a little bit, but first I want to get started with C++ server because a regular GameMaker server isn't too powerful and isn't all that great. In this tutorial we'll be using GameMaker and Visual Studio 2010. Actually, it doesn't really matter which version you have. I think I'm using 2010 anyway, but it doesn't matter. All you'll need for this tutorial is a basic knowledge of C++. There's nothing particularly advanced in this tutorial, and the server will be coded in the easiest way possible, so for anyone screaming at me for doing things a weird way, well, I'm doing it in the simplest way presented for those people who don't have a great understanding of C++ to do so, and I mean those of you who do can probably do this already, so this tutorial is for beginners. And you'll need GameMaker, and this example is for 8.1. Now with the GameMaker file I'm going to start with just an empty project, and also you should be able to download all these files using this tutorial in the description in the video. So if you want to do this as you go along, then I recommend downloading the source files for the server and client, as you will need those. The server project provided will be a ready done server at the end of each part, so you should be able to enjoy that and look through it. So what we're going to be covering in the first episode is just setting up a basic connection, a communication between the client and the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the GameMaker end. Now the first thing we need to do is import the scripts provided in this tutorial, which are just the scripts which are for the DLL which we're going to be using. Now these files are pretty basic. These are just the scripts you need. Now you don't even need to look at these, so don't worry about those. Now you do need to know how to use GameMaker, that's quite important, but what we're going to be doing here is creating an object called Obj Multiplayer Controller. Now this is going to be the object which handles all of the controlling to do with being connected online. Now the basis of multiplayer is sending a series of messages between the client and the server. These are called packets, and the way that servers read these packets in this form is that these packets are sent over a TCP network and picked up by whether it's the server or the client, and placed in a buffer. Now if you don't know what a buffer is kind of like a queue. Data which is received gets slapped on the end of the buffer, then you have a script which is reading the front of the buffer. Each time something in the buffer gets read, it pushes it forward a notch. So say if you've got 3 messages, say 10, 15 or 25 rather, so you've got these 3 messages, a buffer will start here, and it's kind of like a gateway. So if you imagine a gateway, what will happen is that the buffer will then start by reading number 10, and this 10 will then get read. The data will get passed to the game, and then you'll be able to do something with that data. New incoming packets will come on the end, so another packet will go here. The easiest way to imagine it is kind of like a conveyor belt, and this is very important in understanding because a lot of the logic behind multiplayer is about things being in order, but I won't bore you with this. So the first thing we need to do when setting up a multiplayer connection is just start by initializing the DLL. Now you just want to start by doing this. Now this is just all standard stuff, so you need to do that to begin with. That's what you need to do, and I recommend going into GameMaker and clicking both, ticking this off and ticking this on. That will just make your life a lot easier. This one's a little bit sketchy because you can end up with unwanted problems, but if you're having trouble and are getting annoyed with variables which keep on throwing errors because they're not set up, then I recommend ticking that. But for general practice it's not good, but it makes life easier. So the first thing we're going to do is just initialize the DLL, and now what we need to do is get the client to check if there is a server available. So what we need to do is we need to set up the port and the IP to connect to. So what we're going to do is we're going to be running this server on port 12550. The reason I'm doing that is because that's a port forward on my router. This number can be anything between, I'd say between 1000 to 65,000 is just about what you can do, although I'd recommend staying below 25,000. Minecraft, for example, uses I think it uses 2.5 something, I don't know, but whatever. It doesn't really matter what your port is, just as long as it's forwarded on your router. Now you will need to forward the port on your router, and if you want to find out how to do that, go to portforward.com and you can find out from there. So now the second thing we're going to do is global.ip. This is going to be the IP you connect to. Now, because we can have any IP, this can be anything, this can be a digit, just as long as you represent it with a string. For example, my IP would be that would be my IP, for example, and you could use that to connect to a multiplayer server, for example. But in this tutorial, we're going to make it so the user has to input their IP to connect to, and the default for this will be this, because this is localhost. You can also do that by just typing this, but it's just easier to use the number, in my opinion. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get in a connect. So see, we've got a couple of functions here. Now we've got TCP connect and TCP connected. Now these two are slightly different. This one is what you do to connect to the server, and this one checks if you're connected to the server. So let's just go with this global.client TCP. This is just this creates a base buffer and socket for the server. I kind of typed today. This creates a socket for the server. Now you use this socket in future calls to communicate with the server. So what you need to do now is basically this initializes. This is the handle for the TCP connection. So what you do here is TCP connect global.port. No, global.ip, global.port. Now, this is all pretty straightforward, and I think you can have this in two modes. There are two modes you can have the TCP connect in, and this is the blocking, non-blocking modes. Now, for the sake of argument, we will want to run the game in a blocking mode, because if you don't use blocking, then you won't be able to accurately accurately tell when the server has received packets, because when you read the buffer, you won't get a direct response, if that makes sense. So what we need to do is we need to set this value to 1, and this will prevent the game from freezing in the situation of a communication with the server. I'm just going to minimize that. And so now we've got, this is our basic connection. This is how we initialize the connection. Now what we need to do is we need to check whether you've been connected to the server. So I'm just going to put a comment in here, just so we can check. Okay, so now what we do, if TCP connected, then what we need to do in here is we need to input the name of the socket. Now this is the name of the socket. We're going to be using this a lot throughout this tutorial. So this is global.client TCP. Now, if we've connected, then that's all great. So if we're connected, we don't want to do anything. Otherwise, we want to tell the client that it hasn't worked, and basically this is just saying that the server is not being connected to, and for whatever reason you can't connect to it. So this is what we're going to do to start with. We just want to say a simple message saying server is not available, and yeah, the last thing I'm actually going to add up here is a username, because I want the person to be able to enter their username so that we can tell the server who we are in that respect. And now let's just say the default can be player for now. Defaults, if you don't type anything, can just click enter, that's what it becomes. So yeah, I'm just going to end the game if that happens, because we don't want the game to continue running if it can't do anything. Now in a real game you probably just go back to the menu or whatever, destroy this object and so on, but in this situation we're not going to be doing that. In this situation we're just going to be ending the game because there's nothing else to this. Now the other thing we want to do here is Now that we connected, we want to tell the server some information. Now this is the basis of sending packets. So what we're going to do is send a packet telling the server the name of the player. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to clear the buffer, and you can actually use multiple buffers if you want to, but we're not going to cover that in this because there's no need. So what clear buffer does is it clears the output buffer for like all the information out of the output buffer is gone now, which means that we can send a fresh, clean packet just out there to the server, which it can then read. So what we need to do here is there are a series of different things you can use. Like there are a couple of different data types. Now I'll just show you all what we've got. We've got bytes, shorts, ints, and yeah, that's about it. Well, and strings as well. So those are the four main data types we're going to be using. Where you'd use the short is also very similar to int, although the difference between a short and an int is that a short only ranges from about 0 to 65,000, and an int is something like minus 1 billion or something. I don't even know, but it's a large number. This one you would use if it's going to be like a relatively small number, but you want a couple of values of it. And a byte, for those of you who don't know, is 0 to 255, or well, it's got 256 values, but these in this case range from 0 to 255. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to write a simple byte, which tells the server our username. Now, in 39 DLL and in online programming in general, each byte you want to give it a header. The first byte after clearing the buffer is what we're going to use as the header. Now this header tells the server what to do with it. So for example, in this case we'll use 1, and 1 will be our username packet ID. This is essentially the ID of the packet. You can set this to anywhere between 1 to 255, so I mean if you really need more than 255 different kinds of packets, then you can change this to a short, but in most situations you won't need that. But essentially what we're going to do here is just write byte 1, and this is going to be the ID for our username. Now this is just the basics. Now this is the part that's a little bit awkward because this is a little bit different to normal GM servers and C++. It doesn't really matter in a GM server, but when you're using C++ server, this bit is a little bit more important. What we need to do here is, well, first of all, we can just type in a string global.username. You don't need the string, but I just put it in there as a failsafe in case, for whatever reason, it doesn't register. Now, the difference between strings in a C++ server and a GameMaker server is when you send a string to a C++ server, the format needs to be converted. So what you need to do is you need to put true here. Now in a normal situation this wouldn't matter, but if you're going to be like manipulating the data at all in C++ or saving it, then you need to set that to true. What that does is it sends the length of the string along with each individual character of the string as well, which allows the C++ server to correctly read it. Otherwise it wouldn't really know how long the string is and thus would not be able to read it. Now that's done, we simply just do, this is what we do to send the message to the server. Send the message to global.client TCP, and now what that does is that's just send a basic packet to the server containing a username. This is all the data inside the packet, and this is how we send it. This is the socket reference here, so this is our connection reference. You never want to override this variable with anything because that will break your game. So now that this segment is done, this is just the basic stuff. This should allow the player to connect to the server. The last thing we want to do before we continue is make it so that the object properly destroys, because when you're using DLLs in GameMaker it's very important that you unload them, otherwise you're going to end up with some issues arising, and it can cause some pretty serious problems. So what we want to do here is just close the socket. This is a simple line of code. Close socket. Now all this will do is just completely wipe the connection from memory, and then we want to just do DLL free. It's nice and simple. This just unloads a DLL from memory. I'm just going to mark that for future use. So yeah, that's all that done now. So we can lump this in a room, and I mean, what we can also do as well is we can have a little something to tell us that we're connected, but we can get onto that in a minute. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the C++ side of things, and if you haven't done so already and you want to, you can pause the video and look at some of the things. Now this is the basic C++ template that I have. We're using Visual C++ now. You could start a project from fresh, but it's easier in this situation just to open up this project file, as it's already got all the libraries that you're going to be using loaded in. All these things do slightly different things. This is just the C++ version of 39DLL as it is written in like C++, and these are all the files related to it. So what we have here is, this is just a bunch of libraries being loaded. You don't necessarily need all of these, but this is just the ones that I recommend, generally quite useful ones. String stream, file stream, strings, time libraries, those are all very useful just in general. So what else we have here is we've initialized the server port, and I'm actually going to change that to 550 to match the GameMake files. So here, now we don't even want that either. Here we've just initialized a couple of variables. Now the listen socket doesn't even need to get set yet, but in C++ it's worth initializing them just to make sure. Here we also have the server shutdown thing. This is going to be very similar to what we have here, although the server is going to work in a slightly different way to the client, as it's going to be manipulating a lot of players. Now the first thing I'm going to do here is create a player class, and or player header in class, whatever. And if you don't know what a header or a class is, then I would recommend reading some basic C++ tutorials. Now what this is going to be, this is just going to be our player class. This is going to be how we're going to store data for the player. So let's just start with class player. Sorry. Alright, so here we've got a couple of basic variables. So all we're going to do first is just have a string name, and that's all we're going to be needing at the moment. Oh, and one more thing is, I'll just go with sock. That's all we're going to need right now for the player. Now the reason that's throwing an error is because it hasn't been linked into this main file yet. So what we're going to be doing here is just including this into our project through here. So yeah, oops, force of habit. Okay, so now it's loaded, we've got our basic player class here. Normally I would do functions in the player class as well, but in this example, for the sake of ease, I'm actually going to just do all the code in here, just because all the code that's going to process anything is going to be in here. This is just going to be for storing variables, just for the sake of simplicity and just so no one gets overcomplicated. So what this is here, this is just a thing. Sometimes Visual C++ doesn't run this code when the while statement ends. In a program, if you've got a while statement, what should happen is when you close the program, what you'd hope that would happen is that the while statement would end and it would go onto the code after the while statement, which is here. What this does is it's another fail-safe. So if you close the window, or break the window, log off the computer or shut down the computer, then the program will safely close itself and close all sockets and unload the DLL, just to make sure that it works alright. Now this script hasn't actually been written yet, and we're going to get onto that because it's quite important that you understand that you have to use that, just so you understand really. But the main thing we're going to be getting onto here is creating a player when the new connection comes. So what we need to start off by doing is creating a bunch of players. So I'm just going to create a variable called max players. In this case, let's just set it to 16. It doesn't really matter, you can change that number. It's just easier to have a solid amount of players before you create all these player classes. I mean, you can, if you want to, you can use a vector array of players, but that's more complex and not really worth the time. So it's easy to just have 16 static players, and all the other one thing we need to do is just set these guys to not being in use. And the reason, okay, Okay, I should probably just take that out. That should be a boolean. I'm going to try spelling it. That's just bool. Yeah, I get mixed up between languages because they all seem to do it differently. Okay, so that's whether it's in use or not. You know, I was just using integer. It's just easier overall. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is just create the player array. Now, what this will do here is this is an array, and it will create an array with this number of players as specified there. Yeah, so that means that what a constant is a variable that can't change essentially. And so now we've got our array. What this does here is just create 16 instances of this in the server. Now, moving on, what we want to do is we want to get the server to check when a player connects. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to put this in a different thread because we don't want the whole server to freeze when a new player joins, because that wouldn't be very good. So we're going to have a thread which is going to check for new connections. So if you don't know how to create a thread, it's super simple. You simply just choose something super simple. All you have to do is this static dword win API, and then you can call it whatever you want. It's pretty much just like setting up a script. You just have to put that at the start. So I'm just going to call this check for connections. Right. So now we've got this, we can start checking if there's a new connection. So the first thing I want to do is initialize the DLL. This is very similar to the step used in the GameMaker version of the server. I'm just checking that's the right function. Yep, DLL init. Now we've got listen sock up here, so what we're going to do now is, this is pretty similar to the other thing, it's just a little bit back to front. So to actually create the listening socket, this is the socket which the server uses to receive incoming packets and then again send them out. So what we have here is we have this function called Tcp Listen. Now Tcp Listen is essentially what you use, should be an equals there, is what you use to check if there's a new connection attempting. When in the GameMaker version, when you call upon TCP connect, this is what the opposite version of it, this is what receives it. So when that's called, that will attempt to connect, and this function will fire off when it receives a call from the client as such. So what we're going to do here is server port, and because we have, then we just set these to 2 and 1. That's just the couple of variables that would help control the server. This one is the max number of connections that can be present at once. This is not the max number of connections overall, just the max incoming connections. You don't want to set that too high because otherwise it won't work too well. Now the next thing is just another set thing, and this one is called, this sets the server to a naggable version. Now the Nagel algorithm is something which speeds up servers. I don't exactly know why. I think it's to do with not letting TCP networks get overclocked or something, but either way you should set this to true, as it will just help a little bit. So yeah, that's the basis of what you want to do there. Now because we've initialized the listening socket, we want to check that the it's actually worked. So if this doesn't work, there are a number of reasons why this bit won't work. If you've already got something running on that port, then it won't work. So you need to make sure that port is free. So what we're going to do now is just check if it's worked, and you can simply doing that by just doing this. And we're going to use the basic input-output system for the server. It's just going to be a console thing, nothing fancy. Just going to type in a basic message, server failed,